Hey there, and welcome to a conversation with Kuhl, the lead pastor of Mosaic Christian Church just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and the author of a new book, The Contrarians Guide to Church Planting. My name is Jonathan. I'm the associate pastor here at Mosaic, and I want to invite you into a conversation that I got to have with Kuhl. We dive in a little bit into the content of this book, but more specifically, we talk about some of the tensions and mistakes that Kuhl sees church planters making today so that we could encourage you, maybe challenge you, and hopefully together recalibrate the way that we look at church planting so we can make the biggest impact possible in our 21st century context. All right, Kuhl, thanks for being here. Talk about your book, The Contrarians Guide to Church Planting. I know that books take a long time and it's a lot of work. So tell me, you teach us a lot. What's the why behind the what? What's the problem we're trying to solve? So for you, what is the problem you're trying to solve with a book like this?
So when I first got into church planting, I was excited about church planting, passionate about church planting, but I thought church planting's not for me. And it was really because of the image that was presented. Like the people I saw on stage at the conferences were not me. The people who wrote the books were not me. The people I saw being successful were not me. So I kind of thought that's great for them, but not for me. We eventually ended up walking down that path and ended up that it worked. So I thought, hey, I bet there's actually a whole lot more people like me out there who maybe are choosing not to do this great thing that would expand God's kingdom because of these self-doubts and false insecurities that are preventing them from taking that step. So I just wanted to encourage people really like me. The subtitle for the book, I think, could be Church Planting for the Rest of Us. The rest of us meaning the guy who's not going to get on stage at the conference and who doesn't have 10,000 Instagram followers and, isn't the biggest extrovert, funniest guy at the party, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. So I'm going to have more questions about what do you mean by not like me? But you said, you took the step, you went down the journey, and it worked. Tell me a little bit about your church planting story up to this point.
So I grew up at a great church, went to Bible college, ended up working at a new church, portable church in Virginia Beach, Virginia, under Vince Antonucci, and that was a great experience. It really opened my eyes to this idea of church planting. And I would go to this exponential conference, and we planted churches out of that church, and it got me excited about that. Then the church I was raised in hired me as a resident church planter, and then said, hey, we want you to plant somewhere on the East Coast. And we ended up moving to a suburb of Baltimore, Maryland, in a state where we knew nobody. And that was in 2008. We launched in a movie theater. We had really slow growth at the beginning. I mean, one year we grew like 10 people and we were pumped. It was growth. But we've had consistent growth every year for 10 years now. And I just thought, you know what? God's used this. In spite of my insecurities, in spite of what I don't have or what I see as a perceived lack of fitting the norm, we've baptized 600 people in the last 10 years. Yep. And without a doubt, this has been worth it. And I thought, man, I know there's other people out there like me who need to do something similar.
That's great. All right, so I know you're still really involved with planners. You coach church planners. You are passionate about church planting and doing that out of our organization. So how would you title this conversation so that it benefits those type of people or people who are thinking about planting today?
Yeah, we are real passionate about church planting. We didn't want to just plant a church. We wanted to plant a church planting church.
Yep.
And so we've planted, I think it's 5 churches with significant financial investments. Various staff and volunteers serve on leadership teams of different of these. Somebody you may know, you may be related to. We're trying to get a job at a church plant right now. Yep. And sending out just members of our church to be part of church plants. So this is something I'm real passionate about. I coach church planters regularly, and I've seen some of them have the same questions that I have. And I was able to learn from others' mistakes along the way. And so what I've tried to do here is say, what are the main mistakes that I made early on, especially, that I want other people to avoid? So I've kind of titled today, how to avoid the 7 most common mistakes in church planting. And maybe they're not the most common everywhere, but they're the most common that I see that I can relate to. So that's what I wanted to unpack a little bit.
Okay, awesome. That's exciting. Well, let's just jump right in. And what's this first mistake that you see church planters make as they seek to build something that God really cares about?
Number one thing I want people to do is copy systems create culture. Copy systems create culture. Because what I did early on, and what I think a lot of people do, is they reverse this. And they try to copy culture and create systems. And here's how this really first came alive to me. It was before we even moved to Maryland to launch this church, and picking a name of the church. And I thought, man, this is a big thing. Like, our name's going to be there for decades, forever. And, we got to find the good website and what URLs are available and all that stuff. And so I spent hours and hours agonizing, praying, brainstorming. I had this whiteboard, probably like most church planners do, with like 100 names on it, And I realized all the best websites were taken. So, I had to I was trying to come up with something unique for that. And I realized all my buddies in church planting were trying to figure out unique names that nobody else had. And in fact, I ran into a buddy of mine, and we were friends, so I could tease him about it. And I said, what are you naming your church? And he said, Paradox. And I was like, okay, I don't get it. Like, why? And he looked at me this night, he goes, exactly. And I was like, I still don't, I'm not smart enough to understand this. And but what he was trying to do is that same pressure I felt of, I have to be different from everybody else.
Yeah.
And then I realized all the churches I looked up to had these names that were very plain at the time. And, I could go through the list, and they're like geography, or like, this type of location, or this direction, or something. But they had great churches that were reaching lost people. And I realized the success of a church is not directly correlated to its name. I just need to pick a name that I can be passionate about and go for it. So we actually chose the name Mosaic, even though there's other mosaics, even though there's well-known mosaics out there, because we love the metaphor. And the lost people are trying to reach don't care if there's some other church somewhere in the country with that name. They just want a good church where they can understand the gospel, even though they can't phrase it that way. And so we stole the name Mosaic because we loved it. And I realized I can't try and create every system from scratch. I just want to copy systems. The biggest way I tried to do this, the biggest way I think pastors try to do this, is when it comes to discipleship. So they want to create from scratch a brand new discipleship system. And the heart behind that is perfect, because Jesus says, make disciples. Like, that's what we do. But there's thousands of books on that. There's thousands of systems. Copy somebody's system. What I can't copy is a culture. And so I want to spend my energy creating a new culture with my personality, my gifts, our unique place in the world, our geography, even the age of people who come to our church. Let's create a culture, use this system and really use our culture to reach people. In Genesis 1, it says God created man and woman in his image. The only thing we see him doing up until that point is creating. I believe all of us are created to create. And I think the thing we're supposed to create in our churches is unique culture.
Wow, that's really, really good. I can even see that play out in our organization, where you've taught us over time, hey, be you, but if you find something that's great from another church, steal that and let's see how it implements in our organization.
Absolutely.
And that saves a lot of time too. It's almost about efficiency of your time,
Absolutely.
especially as a planner.
Absolutely.
Because I know that time is not something planners feel like they have a surplus on.
Absolutely.
That's great. All right, what's the second one?
Number two thing to avoid, one of the most common mistakes, is be yourself. Be yourself. A mistake I made, I see people I coach making, is trying to be other pastors. And sometimes it's a combination of other pastors, like the dress of this pastor and the preaching style of this pastor. Sometimes they just say, I'm just going to plant that pastor's church. And the reason you love that pastor's church is because they're being themselves.
That's good.
And so early on, when I looked at myself, I actually looked at a picture not too long ago from launch day. We were celebrating our 10th anniversary. I come through and found this fuzzy picture from launch day. And I was wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, which I haven't worn khakis in years on stage. I'll say more about that in a moment. But I had my Andy Stanley table because I was trying to be Andy Stanley. And I thought, I love Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley reaches lost people. I want to reach lost people. Andy Stanley loves Jesus. I love Jesus. Who better to copy? Why not? But then 2 months in, I actually had somebody come up to me and say, at that point, hey, I know this pastor named Tim Keller. Have you been listening to him? And I was like, actually, I haven't. I still have this sermon from him. And then, even later, I had a staff member come to me and say, hey, Carl. And I could tell he was really nervous. I thought he was like quitting or confronting me about a sin issue or something. He said, the way you dress is like a Southern college boy. And I took that as a compliment. And he goes, I don't mean that as a compliment. He said, you live in Maryland. Don't try to pretend like you're in university, in Georgia or something. But I realized in all these three instances, I was trying to be somebody else. And I firmly believe that you imitate till you can innovate. And I need to learn from other great pastors. I need to learn from other great preachers. I just got done talking about that. But at the same time, I don't want to be them. God has given me a unique wiring. He has given me a unique passions. There's this old movie, I guess it's old now, Spielberg movie, Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah, great movie.
Great movie. And Tom Hanks is chasing Leonardo DiCaprio the whole movie. And eventually he catches him, he gets busted, FBI, or prison, then he works for the FBI. But I love the idea of that movie that whatever you're pretending about, you eventually will get caught. And I think that's true in leading a church, on stage preaching. If you're pretending, you'll eventually get caught. It will eventually get caught up with you. So I believe the answer to that is to write your own job description. I talk about this in one of the chapters of the book. There are things you have to do because you lead a church, whether you want to do or not. But then there are things where you just say, what do I want to do? What am I passionate about? And then write that into your job description and go do it. Like, you can't neglect the things you have to do in order to be a healthy church. But what are you really passionate about that you want to do? And go do it. And I think once you do that, God's given you that gift. Paul says, live out your gifts. You're going to end up with a healthy church because of it.
Okay, it sounds like you're saying, don't wait for someone to give you permission to work on something that you're passionate about. So can you let us into maybe a specific example of a way that you've done that?
The area from day one that's fleshed itself out the most is I'm very passionate about creative arts, about really the entire worship service itself. And I have inserted myself into a lot of details of that because I am passionate about it. Do I have to be involved in the level of detail I am in our worship service for it to be executed? No, but I'm passionate about it. I think I can make it better. And so I try to do that. I have pastor buddies who say, I just show up to preach. Our team handles that, and that's good and fine. Now, obviously, as you grow, there's leadership principles in different levels I have to withdraw appropriately. But I'll always be really passionate about creativity and transitions and how that room feels for every single moment, because that's something I'm uniquely passionate about.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, having a front row seat to your leadership, because there are times when I'm in service with you where something will happen and I may not know what's going on, but I'll see you whip out a piece of paper and you'll write down all these notes because you are visualizing and getting in the weeds voluntarily because you trust us, but you choose to because it's something you're passionate about. So even as you say that, I'm like, I see this all the time from you. That's cool to know. All right, so I know something you talk about in this book is almost like an incendiary topic in church planning, but you're actually really passionate about it. Why don't you tell me about the number 3 mistake that you see these guys make?
Yeah, the mistake is to use data wrongly.
Okay.
And sometimes, there's 2 extremes with it. The point I want to encourage people to do is use data. Use data. And so let me just kind of, am I allowed to read from my book?
Go
is
for it,
that
man.
really
it's your
weird?
Book. It's your book.
Let me just read from this. I said, have you noticed the love-hate relationship that pastors have with numbers? If our attendance was low last week, then we say measuring attendance is superficial. Who cares anyway? If our offering is high, it means people are behind the vision. If the offering's low, then it means we're actually doing a good job of reaching lost people. On Easter Sunday, suddenly we think attendance is really spiritual again. If our number of people in groups is static, we say, well, we're just going deeper, right now. If our groups are multiplying, then we say, well, groups are really important to reach lost people. And so we just kind of use data however we see fit in the moment. And it's almost to cover up what we're afraid of or insecurities sometimes. Yeah. But data tells a story. Data tells a story. And I think Scripture is really helpful here because, we could go through all the numbers in Scripture, especially in the Gospels, like this many fish, this many baptisms, this many, people in the crowd that were fed. But in the Old Testament, 2 Samuel 24, Samuel takes a census. What happens? God sends a plague and kills people. Book of Numbers, what does God do? Takes a census twice. And God wants it. So what's the point? The point isn't numbers are evil or numbers are good. It's like money. It's how you use it. And numbers, when used well with the right motive, tell a great story. That's the whole point of the book of Numbers. But when you do it to be arrogant or to depend on yourself and not God, aka be David in 2 Samuel 24, numbers can be a very destructive thing. So it's all in how you use them. So I think the answer isn't to neglect numbers, neglect data. It's to use data wisely. And the most simple illustration I have of this is when I lost my kid.
Okay.
And you've heard me tell this story many times. We tell it at our newcomer class. But back when I just had 2 kids, got 4 now, we were in our house one day. My wife was just kind of hanging out with holding on to our baby. But our 2-year-old had snuck outside. And we went looking for her. We had like heart attacks going on. After a few minutes, we found her. We brought her home and, recovered and hugged her very tightly. And, that's kind of our metaphor of Luke 15 here that we go with new people. But in that moment, I never thought, well, I've still got 1 kid.
Yeah.
How many kids am I supposed to have? Like, let's not count, just whatever we got. No, because my kid was lost and I needed 1 kid, 2 kids, we're good.
Yeah.
And that's when I recovered from my heart attack. And that's what God is doing in heaven. That's Luke 15. And so, I want to count how many people we have, not to take pride, but to think, okay, if we had reached the neighbor I'm building a relationship with, we could have had 1 more. Because that's what Jesus came to do, is seek and save the lost. And it's not just attendance. It's not just lost people. It's, are we measuring, how many people are connected in groups? Are we measuring how many hours we're serving in the community? Are we measuring the generosity of our people? Not to be arrogant, 2 Samuel 24, but to learn from that and see what God's doing. I think a parallel soapbox of mine is in prayer requests. I hate generic prayer requests. I don't think they honor God. I hate prayer requests that say, God, so I have a friend who she has really bad cancer right now. It's really bad. And every morning I pray for her at 6:30. Pop-up reminder on my phone. I don't pray, God, do what you want with that person. Like that would show some kind of honor to God, I think, in honor of that person. But I want her to get well. So I pray, God, get well. And then if she does, I can give God glory for that, knowing He answered my request. If He doesn't, I'll trust God and grow in my trust of God, knowing, okay, God, you must have a bigger purpose that I definitely don't understand here. But I think the parallel to data is, God, we're going to be specific because we're going to learn to grow. And if things aren't going well, if it's telling a bad story, we're going to have to get honest with ourselves and see if our faith can handle that. And if it's telling a good story, we're going to give glory to you and not think anything bad about ourselves or good about ourselves whatsoever, because you did this thing, you're growing this thing, you're making this thing deeper, whatever that is. I think data is not a chance, data can be a chance to grow our ego, but it's actually a chance to grow our faith.
Wow. I think one of the ways that you've led our organization in that is not being afraid to look at the numbers when we're not happy about them. Like you've even used this phrase, lift up the rock and look at the ugly squiggly things from the Jim Collins book, Good to Great. And oftentimes those numbers will point you to where you need to take steps of faith to move the church forward or move the organization forward. Numbers is not something I've had a great relationship with myself, and you've helped me work in that and not be fearful of numbers, but see the faith in them. So even as you're talking, I think this is super beneficial, because as someone who led a campus for Mosaic, who had an unhealthy relationship with numbers, this could be one of the biggest breakthroughs for people, because every single week you've got organizations who are asking you about the numbers, other planters who are asking about numbers.
So a few things we measure are obviously like attendance and offering, of course. We measure baptisms. We measure number of volunteers we have. We keep track of exactly, we know their names. We have like this big spreadsheet and it's kind of complicated, but we need to know like how many people do we have serving. We measure hours we serve in a community when we do this big thing every year. We measure number of people we send on mission trips. And, we handle those different ways, right? Does attendance tell a full story? No, it tells a story, but we have to combine it with other things. We measure first-time guest numbers. Those are going down for us. So because we measured that, we're launching a big inviting series coming up because we measured the data. I talk about in the book how for us, maybe the biggest metric we look at is percentage of people won to the Lord as a percentage of attendance, because that shows us, are we really reaching lost people? Like if just the number of baptisms goes up, like maybe our attendance is going up, but we're actually as a percentage doing worse. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so we look at the percentage of our attendance that's coming to Jesus and really measure ourselves against ourselves every year to see if we can do better. But again, it just all comes back to using data, not for ego, but to grow our faith.
I'm going to put you on the spot real quick about one more number story. When you first were planting, you had a spreadsheet that even tracked interactions in coffee shops. Am I correct?
Yeah, I needed to challenge myself because I go to the gym and I see different types of people at the gym. But the people I think are onto something is there's a couple guys at my gym who have these notebooks where they keep track of how much they lift. Mm-hmm. And the benefit of that is they can look back and see if they're growing in strength or if they're challenging themselves as much as they did the week before even. And I wanted to make sure I was challenging myself early on as much as the week before we even had launched the church publicly. I'm like, how am I going to measure success? And I thought, okay, number of conversations I have each day, number of people I talk to about Jesus or church, number of invite cards I hand out, number of coffees I have with people, number of lunches I have. I know that sounds insane to some people, and not everybody's going to carry it to the level I had, and that's not what I'm saying. And if it's not your thing, have somebody measure it for you. Like if you have a volunteer who can be your assistant, tell him or her, track my coffees or whatever. But that way you can say, man, I told 10 people about our church. I told 10 people about Jesus today. And it was measuring yourself against yourself and a good challenge.
I think that's so good. Man, we've gone through a lot so far, but let's keep trucking. What else you got?
Yeah, here's lesson number 4, I'd say, is create a Me Too culture. And I know at the time of this recording, we live in this Me Too movement.
But we did it before it was cool.
But we did it before it was popular. We had the hashtag before it was a hashtag. And what we meant is really a thing author Brene Brown talked about before the movement started, of just the thing that people are searching for is not someone to tell them what to do, not somebody to point out your problems, but somebody who can sit with you when you say your problems and simply say, me too.
Yeah.
And not me too in a sense of like what you've gone through, I'm going through, but me too in a sense of, hey, what your thing is doing to you, my thing is doing to me, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And so the best picture I've had of this, this is going to be my next book, actually. I don't know if it's too early to plug that since I haven't written a single chapter. But on D-Day, there's these 2 medics as part of the 101st Airborne that got misdropped. The entire 101st Airborne got misdropped in France in the middle of the night. They're getting shot up and all that stuff. They got dropped in the middle of this very tiny town called Angoville. And they were medics, so when fighting broke out, they started seeing people who were getting shot and injured, and they would grab them, they would drag them away, and they needed to work on them. So they saw this old church. It was like 1,000 years old, really tiny one-room church that they would drag the people to, put them on the pews and work on them. The pews were kind of like the beds in the hospital, if you will. And then they had this thing that lasted about a day. Then the fighting moved on, so the medics moved on, and that was it. Well, what happened is people were bleeding because they were working on them, and well after the war was over and people started putting pieces back together, the people of the town went to this church, and something that had happened, unfortunately, is the patients, the soldiers, had bled all over their pews. And it's kind of gross to think about, right? Like, replace the pews. But they didn't. What they did is they varnished over it to preserve it, because they said this church was built to be a place of hope and healing, so let's preserve this, because on D-Day it was a place of hope and healing, creating freedom for the people who lived around here. And I got to go visit that church, and you can see the blood on the pews. Honestly, it's kind of gross because it's like blood. But what a great metaphor of what church is supposed to be. And I just believe that the church is supposed to be a place of open brokenness. We see this lived out in Scripture, where story after story is of messed up people. One of my friends did a series called Broken Halos, and his point was the people in Scripture weren't Bible people, they were just people like you and me. And they had affairs, and they embezzled money, and they hated their family, and they just had the same struggles you and I do. And when people come to church, that's what they want to hear about. And here's why I think this is a struggle planters have. Because when we get on the platform, the stage, in front of the school, wherever you meet, we feel this pressure to have it together. And the people aren't putting it on us. Most of the time, other people aren't putting it on us. We're putting it on ourselves. For some reason, we think, we see the Instagram filtered shots that other people put out and think that's what my ministry needs to look like. But what people really want is bloodstained pews. One of the planters I coach, we were talking about this idea recently, and in a moment of great honesty and vulnerability, he articulated this by saying, I'm just afraid if people see who I really am, they'll leave. And I said, yes. And that's it. When you feel that, that's what you need to talk about. Because that's what will actually attract people to Jesus, because they'll say, this guy's going through what I'm going through. He needs Jesus. I'm like him. I need Jesus. Jesus is going to help us all. And it will actually attract people to the gospel. And so you have to find ways to do this. Here's how I did this recently. You just got to find your faults and talk about it. So we were talking about, at Mosaic recently, caring about yourself when you have anger, using it for yourself or using it for the mission. And so I gave some examples, like when you get bad service at a restaurant, do you let the waitress hear about it, or do you remember, okay, I'm going to leave a big tip and an invite card to church later, so I'm going to handle this in light of that? And I gave a couple examples, and one of them was when you deal with bad customer service, do you let them know about it, or do you remember the mission? And so I told a story about last winter, my wife was out doing stuff. I wanted to go to the gym. I had all 4 kids, called our gym, said, is childcare open? Because it was an hour I normally didn't go to the gym. They said, it's open. Come on up. So I loaded the kids up, got their jackets, got in the van, which is no small feat. We drove up to the gym, unloaded the kids, walked into the gym, and I saw the childcare was closed. And I said to the guy, I looked at the guy at the desk, he said, yeah, our childcare is closed today. And I looked at him, because I was mad. And I said, and again, I'm sharing all this in a sermon. I said, it would be really great if all of you could get on the same page about when the childcare is open. And in complete humility, he looked back at me and said, hey, I'm sorry, man, we tried to call you right back. It's Mosaic Church, right?
Oof.
And our church just cracked up at me. And I said,
yikes.
No, I don't go to church. I don't know what you're talking about. But our church loved hearing that because they do the same thing. And I don't want to get on stage and act like I'm, Pastor Carl 7 days a week, because that's a lie. And being real is what's going to attract people to Jesus. And for some reason, there's this temptation, I think in church at every stage, not just church planting, but I think it's crucial to figure it out at the early stage so you can just set that tone going forward, because that's what will make people want to open up. That's what will attract people to the gospel.
So to piggyback off that, though, one of the tension that planners feel is that they feel alone sometimes. And they feel as though they don't even have a place to put themselves out there. So there's just like that great sort of isolation tension that they feel. And there's that phrase of, not everybody needs to know everything, but some people need to know everything. Have you found that to be the case for you as you've gotten more comfortable being real? Is it simultaneously important that you have people that you can say everything with? Because obviously the pulpit isn't your own personal counseling session.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that, right? And so what I try and tell people is you're always honest.
Okay.
But you vary how open you are.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like one of my pet peeves, can I be honest with you? Well, if you haven't been honest with me, we're not actually friends, right? Yeah. I think what you mean is, can I be open with you? And so when you are preaching, you have to be open to a level that people can handle, right? And a lot of that just comes down to the level of detail you share. Mm-hmm. But I have to share my struggles. So yes, there is a level where I have guys in my life who know everything about me. Well, my pastor friend says, I have people in my life who could get me fired. And you have to have that as a pastor, because if you don't, that will then overflow to the stage, and you think, I have to create this veneer publicly because I have this veneer privately. And so I think what you're saying is really where it starts. Like, I have 2 guys in my life, and if they aren't in your church, which they can be, and I think ultimately should be over time, if they're not in your church, maybe they're a pastor from another place, maybe it's somebody from a church you grew up at, an old mentor, old youth pastor, but you have to have somebody who can get you fired, who you share everything with, and that helps what you're describing, be vulnerable as you preach, and as you lead small groups, and as you lead volunteers or even a staff. because it starts privately.
Okay, and then last question with this portion specifically, did it happen sort of organically and naturally? Were you just waiting for God to bring someone in, or was it more of a decision where you're like, I like this guy, I'm going to choose, he seems to have high character, I'm going to choose to be real with them? Because that is a tension too of, well, I'm waiting for somebody but nobody comes, or is it more of, I'm choosing to do this? What was your situation?
Yeah, accountability and vulnerability is the same thing as leadership. You do it the same way. You test people. Okay. Right? So when I want to give, if I think, man, this person could maybe one day handle a huge leadership role with lots of responsibility, I'm going to give them a little leadership role and see how they respond. Right? Oh, you handled that?
Yeah.
Jesus says, he who will be faithful with little will be faithful with much. I'll give you more.
Yeah.
If you give me more, I'll give you much. And so with being vulnerable with my struggles, it's the same thing. It's, hey, I'm going to let you in a little bit and see how you handle that. And how you handle that's often defined over time. And then over time, I'm going to give you a little bit more and see how you respond to that. Do you challenge me the right way? Do you encourage me the right way? Do you lift me up when I'm down? Do you kick me when I need to be kicked? And then I'll give you more. And then, a few years in, I've got people who know everything about me.
That's great. Makes a lot of sense. All right. What's another mistake that you see in the church plant world that you want to call out, either with this book or in this combo?
Yeah, number 5 way to avoid some of those common mistakes in church planting is use wisdom. And just
sounds simple.
It does sound simple, but it's overlooked. And no one disagrees with this point, but we just don't live it out. And so the metaphor that works for me is I love Mexican food. I mean, if you don't, I think something's wrong with you and you need to repent anyway. But I love Mexican food, and I love all of it. Have you realized that Mexican food's like mostly the same? It's like,
oh, yeah.
What is a chimichanga? Well, it's like
bread, and cheese, and beans.
Yeah, beef, beans, cheese.
Yeah.
What's an enchilada? Well, it's beef, beans, cheese. What's a fajita? Well, it's beef, beans, cheese. So they're all similar. But what do you love about Mexican food besides margaritas is the endless chips and salsa. And so you sit down, they bring you the endless chips and salsa. And the thing about a Mexican restaurant is I can tell if I'm going to like it on the first bite of chips and salsa, because it's all about the salsa. If you got good salsa, I'm going to be happy. If you got bad salsa, like either the super runny kind or the overly chunky kind where I get like a big chunk of onion that's absolutely disgusting, makes me cry, I'm not going to like the whole restaurant. And here's why. Because I put salsa on everything. If I get enchiladas, salsa's all over it. If I get fajitas, I'm just pouring the salsa all over it. Salsa goes on everything. In my opinion, wisdom is the salsa of leadership. Wisdom is the salsa of leadership. Andy Stanley has this great thing he teaches. He calls it the best question ever, based on Ephesians chapter 4. What's the wise thing to do? Some issues aren't sin issues. We ask what's sinful or what's wrong. Well, it's hard to figure out sometimes. This thing's sinful, I don't know, but is it wise? And I think, if you take athletic ability, somebody can have great athletic ability, but if they don't have discipline to combine with that, they're not going to get very far. And I think someone can have great giftedness and passion and leadership, but if they don't have wisdom, it's not going to get very far. And so here's how it worked out for us. In church planting, it was choosing a location. Because when we got hired as a resident church planter, they said, hey, has God called you to a specific location? We said no. They said, well, God's called us to plant churches all over the northeast part of the country. The sending church said this. And they said, so we want you to visit the major cities all up and down the East Coast, from D.C. to Boston, and figure out where God's calling you. And so I talked to other church planters who had these amazing stories. Like I did when we were picking a location, I interviewed other church planters, said, how'd you pick a location? And they said, we were back where you were doing, and we visited different cities, and God spoke to us. And I remember my favorite story is my friend named Scott planted in Maine. He said, Carl, we were doing the same thing you're doing. Me and my wife have been told, hey, this city of Maine needs a new church. You need to go check it out. He told the story of flying into Maine. They got a rental car. They stopped at like the local gas station so he could get a snack, and she was asking for directions, I think. And he goes and gets his ho-hos. She walks up to the counter, and his wife is crying with and embracing the checkout lady at the 7-Eleven or whatever. And he's like, honey, what's going on? And as his wife was walking up to ask directions, the clerk there, before she even saw anybody, just said out loud to nobody in particular, I wish there was just a good church I could go to around here.
Wow.
And the wife said, we're here to see if we should plant a new church. And the woman said, I'll come to your church. I don't even go to church. And they started sharing their life stories with each other and crying and praying together. And that was all she wrote. And now he leads a church that last I heard had 600 people in it. And so I thought, yes, this is what's going to happen to us. God is going to open the clouds. He will speak in a James Earl Jones type voice. And he will say, this is where thou shalt plant. And I remember the first place we ever looked of DC, Baltimore, New York, all these places, was Baltimore. And we ended up here, but the first place we looked was a northern suburb of Baltimore that we did not end up planting at. It was lunchtime, so we went to Chipotle, and I remember getting my soda, and it was filled with a bunch of people, the restaurant was, of people in their business attire on their lunch break, 20-somethings. I thought, okay, young people, this is a growing area, maybe this would be a good place. I walked up to this guy at the Coke machine, and the way I was going to open the door for God to act was I was going to say, hey, do you know of any good churches around here? So I walk up to this guy in his white shirt, and I said, do you know of any good churches around here? And what I thought was going to happen was he was going to say, no, man, but if you start one, I'll come to it. That did not happen. What happened instead is he looked at me like I had the plague and he would die if he talked to me for 2 more seconds. He said, no, and he ran away as fast as he could. I repeated the same exercise multiple times, and the same thing happened every time. So I was perplexed, thinking, God, we're praying about this. We're fasting about this. Other people praying for this. We want to honor you and reach lost people. How do we figure out where to plant? And we were looking at it from a spiritual perspective, and we ended up saying, well, let's just look at it from a practical perspective. And so we thought, well, if GE, because they were big in the city where we were coming from, was transplanting us somewhere, and they said, where do you want to move? How would we pick out a city there? And so we just tried to ask, what's the wise thing to do? We looked at a bunch of demographic studies that didn't feel very spiritual at all. We talked to a ton of people. Wisdom in many counselors, Scripture says. Said, hey, if you were planting here, where would you go? We had them drive the neighborhoods with us. We made multiple trips that cost money, to investigate even different neighborhoods in the area. And we ended up asking, if we were choosing where to plant, where would we want to go? And I kind of felt bad because it didn't feel very spiritual. But we think it was the wise thing to do because we wanted to lay down some roots where we could minister for a long time. And God blessed it. So I always want to challenge planters, whether it's choosing a location, whether, whatever it is, yes, do the spiritual work. Get on your knees and pray. What does Scripture say? Is there a sin issue here? But at the end of the day, use wisdom. It's the salsa, I think, of church planting.
All right, so I know we got 2 more things to discuss before we wrap things up today. So let's keep going. What is number 6 on this list?
Yeah, the next one I love is something I learned at a breakout seminar at the Exponential Conference several years ago. I went to this seminar called How to Break Through the 200 Barrier, and it was really funny. It was led by Brian Jones. And it was funny because they'd put it in a room for like 15 people, and there was literally like 150 people that showed up. So we moved the desks out of the room. We all sat on the floor, crammed in. It was hot and sweaty, but he taught this great thing, and this is my point, use bucket theology. Use bucket theology. Okay. And I think he had made it up, Brian Jones, as far as I know. Maybe he got it somewhere else. But what it was this. It was so helpful for me because his basic point goes like this. When we start a church, because we love Jesus, because we want to expand the kingdom, we want to be the full expression of the kingdom of God. Like we want to do local service. We want to help marriages. We want to reach youth. We want to care for the elderly. We want to do global missions. And we want to do it all now because that's what the church should do. I mean, there's 20 other things I could list, right? We want to be the full expression of the kingdom of God. But what Brian challenged us to do is think of it like this, and he called it bucket theology, is he said, pretend you have a bunch of buckets, and these are all the different ministries. And you can pick, as a church planter, you can name these buckets whatever you want. So there's like adult worship, there's kids on the weekend, there's youth, there's global missions, there's local missions, and you could add more. Mm-hmm. And he said what we try to do is we have X resources, and we try, because they're all important, they're all scriptural, we try to put equal amount of resources in each of these. And he said wrong, because they all stink, right? A worship service that has this amount of resources is not a very good worship service. And a youth group that has this amount of resources is not a very good youth group. And a local impact that is getting this much attention is not that great of local impact. It's not that much impact, and it's not well organized, whatever. So he said what to do is you need to put them in the order that God has called you to do. And so, for example, for us, we say we are going to put first the adult worship experience. That is what we're going to invite people to and be known for, and that will, out of the growth of that, impact everything else. But you can order it any way you want. I have another church plant friend who said for us it's local impact. We want to be known as the church who serves our community, and that's how we're going to grow. We want people to, if they're coming to our church, we want them to first attend one of those things. So the order of it is irrelevant. Some people say I want to grow based on a great kids ministry, because if we reach parents, we'll grow from there and be able to do all these things. But you got to pick what your first bucket is and put them in order. Then put all your resources in the first bucket. And that's money, that's if you can afford staff, it's volunteers, direct them mostly towards that first bucket and make the first bucket great. Then what happens is when that fills up, it begins to overflow into the second bucket. And so if your second bucket is local impact, say, you begin to fill up that second bucket. And then when that fills up, it overflows in the third one, and the third one becomes full, and on and on and on. And now the temptation is maybe you reach a season where giving is down or where growth is stagnant. And so you notice the first bucket start to come down a little bit because you can't pour as much money or hours, whatever it is. And you want to say, well, we've got these other buckets going, so even though this is down a little bit, we still need to put equal resources over here now. No, you still keep the buckets going. First bucket has to be the top priority. You continue to pour that in, and you stick to it. And Brian calls this bucket theology. And what happens is you end up, at the end of it, becoming the full expression of the kingdom of God, because you do all those things and you do them well, as opposed to if you don't do that, if you just start off trying to do all those things, you don't do them well. Here's the example from our church. I believe in global missions because I'm a Christian. So I wanted to be able to say, I was so passionate about this. I wanted to be able to say, from year one of our church, we have sent people on global mission trips. I really wanted to be able to say that. And we had about 90 people in year one, but we were able to organize a trip, and I was real excited because I envisioned, 25 years from now, however big our church is, we're going to say, from year one, we've been doing this. Every year we send people on global trips. But the trip fell through. And then I found somebody else, and she was able to find a trip to Mexico through something she'd gone through, like in her youth group, a few years before. And she's like, hey, they plan it all. All we got to do is raise some money, and it'll be great. And I was like, yes, let's do it. You build a house, and it'll be great. A month before we were supposed to go, I think it was, the State Department issues this travel ban that says, Americans, you can go anywhere you want in Mexico, except for this one area, which was the one area where our mission trip was going to go. And so we had to cancel it. The thing completely fell through. Like, people were getting kidnapped there. It was a disaster. Wow. So we couldn't do it. And we tried, but couldn't get a mission trip going our first year. In year two, we had hired someone to oversee our kids ministry and all of our local and global impact. Once she came on, mission trip every year after that, because we had the resources to do it. We had hired first for our first bucket, but once we were able to give adequate resources to missions, we did it, and I've been proud of it. And so I can say, ever since the second year of our church, we've done global missions, but that was bucket theology lived out. And now I'd like to think we do it well because we put our resources into our first bucket, and that was able to overflow into our second.
All right, man, so we've gone through 6 already. I know there's one more, but it probably isn't the least important one that we're going to talk about. So what is this last principle or mistake to avoid? What's number 7 in our conversation today before we wrap things up?
Yeah, this is so elementary. Stand on the gospel. Stand on the gospel. Be known for the gospel.
That sounds really simple. So what are you getting at here then?
Well, if you remember this old movie, and if you haven't seen it, you have to go watch it. Have you ever seen Hoosiers?
Parts. I've never seen the whole thing.
We cannot be friends after this until you go watch it.
I know my staff situation is in jeopardy right now.
It is. It's really old. But it shows this small farm town high school basketball team from the state of Indiana, because the state of Indiana at the time had one high school basketball tournament for every school. There wasn't like classes. And so you had this small school farm town basketball team. Gene Hackman becomes their coach. They have this great guy, Jimmy, who can play great ball. And, it follows their season. And they end up in the state final, and it's in this huge stadium. And so they walk in, and they're used to playing in a gym with like 100 seats in it. And you can see their jaws drop as they're standing around the stadium. Like, wow, this is insane. And they're already getting scared. And so Gene Hackman, in a great scene, pulls a tape measure out of his pocket. And he calls one of the players over. He says, hey, get on his shoulders, measure how high the basketball hoop is. And he measures it. He goes, what is it? The guy goes, 10 feet. He goes, 10 feet. He goes, okay, measure the free throw line. How far is it? 15 feet. 15 feet. And he goes, what you're going to find is this is the same height hoop, same size court that we play on back home in Hickory. And he goes, don't worry about anything else. You stick to what you know. And I love that scene. I think it's so valuable for us as church planners because there's so much you got to worry about in church planning. You got to worry about stuff you never even thought about. You got to worry about, like, how do I print a program? How do I become legal? How do I find a place to meet, my goodness? How do I raise money? You go on, I got to get my Instagram account. How do I get a logo? How do I manage a YouTube page? How do I get a website? How do I lead staff? How do I find, we go on for an hour. But the thing that saves people is the gospel. Yeah. And it is so tempting for us as church planters to be like those guys from Hickory walking into that arena looking at everything else instead of looking at the hoop. Because we're there to play ball. We're there to preach the gospel. Now, those other things are around us, but at the end of the day, it's about Jesus and the gospel. So I ran across some stats not too long ago when I was researching this book that really reminded me of this, because there's so much we want to accomplish as pastors, as church planters, but there's one key that leads to all of them. And this, what I'm going to read was not just a study, it was a compilation of studies, and if you research that kind of stuff, it just means it's more trustworthy. Okay. Here's what I found. Reading the Bible 4+ times per week decreases the odds of giving into drinking to excess by 62%. Viewing pornography goes down 59%. Sex outside of marriage goes down 59%. Mishandling money goes down 29%. Reading the Bible 4+ times per week decreases your odds of feeling bitter by 40%, thinking destructively of yourself by 32%, feeling discouraged by 31%, feeling anxiety 14%. It keeps going. Reading Bible 4 times per week increases your odds of giving financially to church by 400%, of discipling others by 200%, of sharing your faith with others 228%. And it just goes on from there. But what that reminded me of is I have to be in God's Word, because God's Word, the message of it, the sole message of it, is the good news that you are a sinner, and God, in His love for you, sent His Son to die for you to reconnect you back to God so you can be set free. Yep. There's a great paraphrase of Matthew 11:28 through 30, where Jesus says, if you're tired or worn out or burned out on religion, come to me. I'll give you a real rest. And I love these words. I'll help you live freely and lightly. And listen, Instagram doesn't help people live freely and lightly. A good website does not help people live freely and lightly. A good service project, as important as it is, doesn't help people live freely and lightly. What helps people live freely and lightly is them accepting Jesus as their leader and forgiver, as their Lord and Savior, saying, this is what I want for my life. I'll never forget a conversation I had. Early on in our church, we had 90 people, I think, every week at the beginning. And there was a group of friends who came who were all actively living a gay lifestyle. And at one point, kind of the most vocal of the guys said, hey, me and all my friends are gay. We're not going to change. I want to talk with you about your church's stance on that. And I was nervous because Scripture is absolutely clear on this, but it was the first time I'd had to have this conversation. So I was nervous going into it. And we picked a Starbucks to meet. I think it was a Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and I felt sick to my stomach all day because of my compassion for him and my desire to have him stay in our church and not alienate him, but help him see this is because God loves you. So we sat down, and I'll never forget, the guy's hand was shaking. Wow. Like he couldn't hardly lift up his cup of coffee because he was so nervous that he was going to experience rejection or hate. And in that moment, everything inside me completely changed. Because I thought, this isn't me delivering bad news to this guy. This is me giving good news that can set him free.
Wow.
Because I stand on God's word. It is the word of God that sets people free. Because the message of Jesus, as big as it is what's best for him. And so in compassion and love, I was able to walk him through Scripture. He obviously didn't agree with what Jesus says even about marriage, going back to Genesis 1. But I said, this is a safe place for you. And this is a place where you can live freely and lightly. I hope you'll keep journeying with us. And that's what happened over the years, is people who disagree with Scripture, because we're honest about it, because we present the gospel, stay here, they come and see, and they say, okay, I'm in, I want Jesus.
Wow. Man, that last story is so significant, because I think a lot of us will second guess based on our emotions. Like, it's actually not that complicated. Just preach the gospel, tell them about how much God loves them through Christ. It even combats the fear or shame that we feel sometimes when we tell people news they don't want to hear, but that's so good.
And it really comes down to, in those situations, like, what do I believe is going to save some people?
Yeah.
Is it going to be my humor as a preacher, or how cool our church is, or this effectiveness of this ministry, or is it everything Jesus has to offer?
Yeah.
That's the choice.
That's so good. Man, Carl, thanks for taking the time and go through this. I know that we're going to have a wide variety of people listening, some who are thinking about church planting, some who have never even thought about till they hear about this, and some who maybe have just planted, or maybe they're several years and they don't know if they have what it takes. So, as best you can, give us a closing thought based on what God's taught you, is using you to communicate to people. Give us something you'd like to wrap up on to that audience that you're writing this book for.
Got 4 kids, and I remember the moment with our first kid when we left the hospital. Because, there's all this hype around having a kid, whether it's your first or fourth, but especially the first, because it's all new. You don't know what's going on. And we had done like the hospital class. We've been reading parenting books. We had, my wife had siblings who'd all had kids. So, we knew as much as you can before you have a kid. But I remember, you're there a day or two, whatever, before you take the baby home from the hospital. I remember that moment where we buckled the baby up, and, they kind of walked us down the front door, and we were walking out. And I was kind of freaking out. Like, wait, we're walking out with another human. Yeah. Like, is there a paper to sign? Is there a license we have to get? Like, where's like the degree we have to have for this? And I thought of all the things in my life that you have to work really hard for, jump through all these hoops. Like, to get a passport, you got to go to the post office, you get a picture, and you got to send in this, you got to send in money, to register a car, to get a high school diploma. Like, anything you do in life requires this class and this hoop to jump through. And I thought, what I wanted to ask the nurses, wait a second, you're telling me anybody who wants to can just make a baby, take it home, and raise it however they want? Like, this doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah.
But I realized, you know what? What people do is they try and do the best they can. They make it up as they go. And they make mistakes. Have I made share mistakes in parenting? Oh my goodness. But we've done the best we can, and I think on the whole, it's working. And I think there's a lot of people out there who say, you know what, I wouldn't know what to do. Or I'm already in it and I don't know what to do. And so the last chapter of the book, I titled My Secret, and I'll just give it away what it's about. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, and nobody else does either.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't like when people get up and say, hey, here's how to plant a church, here's how to lead a church, because you don't know. I know because I do it, and I don't know either. And I know everybody I've been alone with in a quiet place where they were actually honest would say, yeah, I really don't know what I'm doing. I've learned from mistakes. I've learned from Scripture. I study and do the best I can. But nobody knows what they're doing. And so I believe there's a generation of people that God has been working on for years to stir something inside them. Because that metaphor, the story of my kid being lost in the neighborhood is a metaphor for what's going on inside you of, I have something inside me that I know if I was in an environment where I could actually use my gifts, I think God would use me to bring some of his lost kids home. And maybe your church would reach 5 people for the kingdom, maybe it'd reach 5,000. but I know it'd reach some lost people. And I would just want to say those people, go for it. Do the steps we talk about in the book, but go for it. Because Isaiah, when he's called, doesn't have a burning bush. He doesn't have Jesus come up to him and say, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. He just overhears God thinking out loud saying, who's going to reach some people? He says, I'll do it. And then he does. That's my story of church planting. I think it could be the story of a lot of other people as well.
So good, man. Thanks for taking time to share, Carl. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We don't take for granted the amount of time that you've invested into this conversation. And I hope you know that we've only scratched the surface of the content that Carl has put into this book. There's a lot of great things that we talked about today in those mistakes that church planners are making, but that is just a small sample of what we get into in this book. So if you're a church planner, or maybe you're feeling like God might be calling you to plant a church, I hope you pick up your copy today of the Contrarians Guide to Church Planting. And in the process, we hope that you are encouraged, that you're challenged, and that maybe we even recalibrate the way we think about church planting so we can make the biggest impact possible for God's kingdom in our 21st century context.